33 kilometers. That is the only thing standing between the world economy and a full-scale energy catastrophe. And this weekend, Iran announced that passage through those 33 kilometers will never, under any circumstances, return to what it was before this war began. Not after a ceasefire, not after negotiations, never. If you think that is just another negotiating tactic, stay with me, because what is actually happening here is something the world has not seen since the Cold War, and almost no one is explaining it correctly. Before we go further, if you follow geopolitics, energy markets, or global news, and you are not getting daily updates on this crisis, you are already behind. Drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Because this affects every country on this planet differently, and I want to know how it is hitting yours. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow strip of water between Iran and Oman. At its tightest point, it is just 33 kilometers across. You could drive that distance in under 30 minutes. And yet, through that modest channel passes approximately 17 million barrels of oil every single day, roughly 20% of everything the world burns, and nearly 30% of all seaborne oil trade on Earth. The Suez Canal matters. The Panama Canal matters. But neither of them, if sealed shut tomorrow, would trigger a global energy crisis within weeks. The Strait of Hormuz is in a category entirely its own, and as of this weekend, Iran has declared it a permanent geopolitical weapon, not a temporary bargaining chip, but a lever of power to be released only on Tehran's terms, if it is released at all. Here is what most analysts are missing, and this is the part that should genuinely alarm you. Every previous Iranian threat to close the strait, going back to 2011, 2012, the Obama years, the Trump maximum pressure campaign, was exactly that, a threat. Loud, dramatic, and never fully executed. Markets panicked briefly, diplomats made phone calls, and within days, Iran walked it back. That is the pattern everyone in Washington, Brussels, and Riyadh has been trained to expect. But something is structurally different this time, and once you understand what it is, the entire situation reframes itself in a deeply unsettling way. Iran has now been at war for nearly 2 months. It has absorbed direct military strikes from both the United States and Israel. Senior IRGC commanders are dead. Its economy is under naval blockade. And instead of softening, Iran is hardening its position. This weekend's statement is not the language of a government preparing to negotiate. It is the language of a government that has made a calculation, that reopening the strait without winning substantial concessions would be more dangerous to its survival than keeping it closed. Think about that logic carefully, because it is internally coherent. If Iran backs down now, it will have proven to every future adversary that its ultimate deterrence card, the threat that kept American military planners awake for 40 years, can be called and beaten. Its geopolitical leverage would be permanently destroyed. So from Tehran's perspective, the cost of reopening on bad terms may actually exceed the cost of the global economic pain they are inflicting. This is what game theorists call a credible commitment trap, and it is one of the most dangerous strategic situations in international relations, because there is no clean exit that satisfies both sides. Now let us talk about the physical reality, because this is the piece that almost never makes it into mainstream coverage, and it is the reason this crisis cannot simply be resolved by a military operation. Iran has spent years, arguably decades, preparing for exactly this scenario. The IRGC Navy has seeded the strait and the wider Persian Gulf with thousands of naval mines. These are not relics from the Second World War. They are sophisticated, pressure-sensitive devices engineered to be extraordinarily difficult to locate and neutralize. The Pentagon has confirmed to Congress that clearing the strait after a ceasefire, under the most favorable conditions with full international cooperation, could take up to 6 months. 6 months. On top of the mines, Iran has deployed anti-ship missile batteries along its entire southern coastline, fast attack boat squadrons designed to operate in swarm formations against larger warships, and submarine assets built specifically for the shallow, complex acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf. This is not a blockade that ends with a press conference. Reopening the strait against active Iranian resistance would be one of the most complex and costly naval operations the United States has attempted since the Pacific theater of World War II.
The 6 nations of the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman, are collectively sitting on some of the largest proven energy reserves in human history. Under normal circumstances, that wealth flows freely out through the strait to fuel the global economy. Right now, it cannot move. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have pipeline infrastructure that can bypass the strait. The Abqaiq-Yanbu line and the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline can push some oil westward to Red Sea terminals. But their combined capacity is a fraction of what the strait moves daily. They are pressure relief valves, not replacements. Kuwait has virtually no bypass capacity, and Qatar, the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, ships almost everything it produces through the strait. Qatar's entire national economy is built on LNG exports. The closure of this waterway is not an inconvenience for Doha. It is an existential threat. And then, this past weekend, something happened that received almost no coverage in Western media, and it may be the most consequential development of this entire conflict. An Iranian military commander announced an expansion of Iran's declared target list, beyond military installations, to include oil fields, pipelines, and refinery infrastructure across the broader Gulf region. The named targets included sites in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and Bahrain. Let that combination register fully. Iran is now saying, "We are keeping the strait closed, and if you attempt to route oil through alternative pipelines, or if international pressure against us intensifies further, we will strike the energy production infrastructure of every American-aligned country in the region." The strait closure currently threatens roughly 20% of global oil supply. A successful strike campaign against Gulf production infrastructure could take 30, 35, perhaps 40% of global petroleum off the market simultaneously. There is no modern economic precedent for that scenario. None. There is a dimension to this crisis that goes beyond geopolitics and energy markets, one that a growing number of serious scholars and theologians are discussing openly. The prophet Ezekiel, writing more than 2,500 years ago, described a coalition of nations that rises against Israel in what he called the latter days. Among those nations named explicitly is Persia, the ancient designation for what is now Iran. The text describes a conflict centered on the Middle East, led by Persia, that threatens the economic stability of surrounding nations and ultimately becomes the backdrop for what Ezekiel describes as divine intervention on a scale visible to the entire watching world. I am not making a claim of mechanical prophetic fulfillment. Biblical prophecy almost never works that simply. But the alignment of actors, the geography, the economic stakes, and the scale of potential consequences are more directly parallel to Ezekiel 38 and 39 than any event in modern recorded history. That is not sensationalism. That is honest pattern recognition, and it deserves to be part of how we think about what we are watching unfold. What does a world look like in which the Strait of Hormuz is semi-permanently restricted? It looks like a fundamental restructuring of global energy infrastructure, measured in years and trillions of dollars. It looks like an accelerated transition toward energy independence for nations that can achieve it. It looks like severe economic destabilization for the nations, and there are dozens of them, that currently import 80 or 90% of their energy from the Gulf, nations where that kind of economic pressure historically translates into political collapse. It looks like a new global energy map where power shifts dramatically toward countries with substantial domestic production: the United States, Russia, Canada, Brazil. And it looks like energy security becoming the single most dominant organizing principle of every national government on Earth for the next generation. The post-war international order was constructed on two foundational assumptions: free navigation of international waters and American naval supremacy as the enforcement mechanism that made that navigation possible. Iran is directly and deliberately challenging both of those foundations simultaneously. Whether that challenge ultimately succeeds or fails, the world that comes out the other side of this conflict will be structurally different from the one that entered it on February 28th. Iran's strategy is not conventional military confrontation. Iran knows it cannot defeat the United States in a traditional war. What it is executing is an economic attrition campaign, imposing costs that are not militarily unbearable, but that are economically and politically unsustainable over time. The closure of the strait, maintained long enough, could generate a global recession severe enough to reshape domestic politics inside the United States, erode the public support base of the administration conducting the conflict, and ultimately force a negotiated settlement that Tehran can frame to its own population as something other than defeat. History offers partial guidance here. American pressure failed to break Castro's Cuba. International sanctions contributed to, though did not singularly cause, the end of apartheid in South Africa. Economic pressure eventually brought Iran itself to the table in 2015, producing the nuclear agreement, though notably without breaking the Islamic Republic's fundamental structure. The variable that determined each outcome was time. Who could absorb the pressure longer? Who flinched first? And what was the political condition of each side at the moment one of them broke? That clock is running right now. And the people paying for it, while governments and analysts debate the endgame, are the 45 million people the World Food Program has already flagged as facing acute food insecurity as supply chains collapse. The workers in Germany, Japan, South Korea, and India, whose wages are being quietly eroded by rising energy costs flowing through every sector of their economies. The fishing communities, the sailors, the small traders, whose entire economic world depends on the free movement of vessels through a narrow channel that one government has now declared its permanent sovereign instrument: 33 kilometers, a distance shorter than many people's morning commute, and it sits right now at the absolute center of the most consequential geopolitical confrontation of the 21st century. Here is what I want to ask you directly, and I mean this. If the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed for the next 6 months or the next year, what happens to your country? Not in the abstract, specifically. The prices you pay, the stability of your government, the security of your job. And here is the harder question underneath that one. Do you believe the people governing your nation have been honest with you about how genuinely unprepared most governments are for a prolonged closure? Leave your answer in the comments. People who follow this kind of analysis daily are some of the most clear-eyed thinkers I encounter anywhere. Your perspective on this is not just welcome, it is necessary. We are tracking this crisis every single day as it develops, because the situation is moving faster than weekly coverage can capture. If you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button so you do not miss what comes next. This is not a story that is going to slow down.